They laughed at him, mocked his dreams, pointed fingers and whispered, "He'll never make it." But what happened next? No one could have imagined. The night was quiet, except for the faint hum of the rain tapping against the rusted window of Jesse's small room. A single bulb flickered above his desk, throwing long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. He sat there, eyes tired, heart heavier than the world outside, staring at a notebook that held more of his soul than his words. Every page carried a dream, a hope, a sentence that he couldn't yet complete. His fingers trembled as he held the pen, but his mind kept whispering, "What if they're right?" He closed his eyes for a second. The sound of rain grew louder, like it was trying to speak to him. Maybe it was saying, "You're still here." Or maybe it was reminding him of every voice that told him to quit. Jesse had grown up in a small town where dreams didn't survive long. People worked, ate, slept, and repeated, and anyone who dared to think beyond that cycle was either laughed at or pitied. Jesse was one of those few who dared. He wasn't extraordinary. He wasn't born talented. He wasn't the smartest in class, nor the bravest. But inside him burned something raw, a longing to mean something, to create something that could outlive him. Sometimes he'd stand on his rooftop at dawn, watching the sky bleed from black to gold, and whisper to himself, "Someday." That "someday" felt far away now. He had tried. Oh, he had tried to prove himself. He failed exams, lost small jobs, and faced rejection after rejection. Every no felt like a nail in his heart. People stopped believing in him, then stopped talking to him altogether. Even his closest friends laughed it off when he shared his next idea. "Jesse, you always talk about big things," they'd say. "But you never finish anything." The truth was, they weren't wrong. He had given up too many times before. But not because he didn't want it, because he didn't know how to keep going when the world refused to see his worth. He looked at his reflection in the window. The rain had softened now, but his eyes looked harder than before. There was a quiet fire there, something that refused to die. He whispered to himself, almost in defiance, "They don't know what's coming." Then he smiled faintly, not out of pride, but out of pain. Because sometimes, pain is the only thing that keeps you alive long enough to find your purpose. He remembered his father's words, the last thing he ever said before he left. "Son, the world doesn't owe you a thing. You either make your place in it, or get washed away." Jesse was 12 then, too young to understand. But now, sitting in that dimly lit room, with failure breathing down his neck, he finally understood. He leaned back on his chair, feeling the wood creak beneath him, and stared at the notebook again. His thoughts were scattered, images of childhood, laughter, loss, and that constant feeling of being less. But tonight felt different. The pain didn't break him this time, it began shaping him. He stood up and opened the window. The cold air hit his face. The street outside was empty, just puddles and distant lights flickering through the mist. He whispered, "Maybe I was never meant to fit in, maybe I was meant to stand out." A small spark ignited somewhere inside him. Not big enough to change everything, but enough to make him pick up the pen again. His hand trembled, but he wrote one line, "The ones who fail the most, learn the deepest truths." He stared at those words for a long time. They didn't fix his life, but they fixed his direction. That night, he promised himself, quietly, with no witnesses, that he wouldn't run this time. No matter how hard, no matter how slow, he'd walk through the fire until he found who he was meant to be. He looked up again. The rain had stopped. The sky was still dark, but somewhere behind the clouds, dawn was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, Jesse didn't fear the dark. He understood that darkness wasn't his enemy, it was his beginning. He whispered under his breath, almost as if talking to the universe, "You'll remember my name someday." And in that whisper, there was no arrogance, only quiet faith. Outside, a distant thunder rolled, soft and low, like an answer from the heavens. Jesse smiled faintly, closed his notebook, and turned off the light. But sleep didn't come easy, because when purpose finally wakes up inside you, rest never does. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside, a feeling that the next morning wouldn't be just another morning. It would be the start of something the world hadn't yet seen. And as the night faded into a faint shade of blue, Jesse's eyes stayed open, calm, steady, and quietly ready for war. The world had no idea what was coming. The next morning came without sunshine. Just a cold gray sky and a silence that carried weight. Jesse woke up before dawn, the same ache in his chest, but this time it felt different. He didn't rush to check his phone, didn't scroll through failures, didn't search for another motivational quote. He simply sat on the edge of his bed, breathing. The air was cold, yet sharp, like it wanted him to stay awake, alert, alive. He made tea in the small kettle his mother had left behind, poured it into a chipped cup, and took it to the window. The town was still asleep. There was something almost poetic in that, everyone dreaming, while he was finally ready to stop dreaming and start doing. He whispered to himself, "Let's begin." For the first time in months, he opened his notebook again. The words from last night stared back at him. The ones who fail the most, learn the deepest truths. He underlined it. Twice. Then, he wrote a new sentence beneath it. But the ones who get up again, they rewrite their destiny. That day, Jesse started small. He cleaned his room, threw away the old papers, tore out the pages that only carried excuses. He took his old laptop, the one that froze every 10 minutes, and started working. He didn't even know what to call it yet. Maybe a dream, maybe madness. But all he knew was that he was done living like a ghost in his own life. Outside, the town began to move. Cars, voices, the same old rhythm. But Jesse wasn't listening. He typed, erased, typed again. His fingers hurt, his back stiffened, but he didn't stop. He was building something, a story, a vision, maybe even a new version of himself. But life doesn't reward effort that easily. Days turned into weeks, and Jesse's small spark began to dim again. Every time he felt a little progress, something hit back harder. The laptop died once, his internet got cut off twice, and when he finally gathered enough courage to show his idea to someone, they laughed. "You really think people will care?" one of them said, chuckling. "Bro, the world's too busy to listen to your sob story." Those words stung more than he expected. He smiled politely, nodded, and walked away, but inside, it felt like he was shattering all over again. That night, he sat by the river near his town. The moon was pale, its reflection trembling in the moving water. Jesse picked up a small stone and threw it into the river, watching the ripples fade. That's what his life felt like. One ripple that disappeared too fast. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. But he didn't. He just sat there in silence. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's exhaustion that no one sees. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Maybe I'm not built for this." His voice broke. Maybe they were right all along. A gust of wind passed by, cold and sharp, like a reply he didn't want to hear. He buried his face in his hands. It wasn't just failure anymore, it was fear. Fear of becoming invisible. Fear that all his pain would mean nothing. But as he sat there, lost in thoughts, he saw something that made him pause. A young boy, maybe 12, standing by the same river, holding a paper boat. The boy looked at Jesse and smiled. "It'll reach the other side," he said softly, pushing the boat into the water. Jesse blinked. "What if it sinks?" he asked, half-heartedly. The boy shrugged. "Then I'll make another one." Something about those words hit him deep. The boy ran off into the mist, leaving Jesse staring at the small white boat floating down the stream. It didn't look strong. It wasn't perfect. But it was moving, slowly, steadily, refusing to stop. Jesse watched it until it disappeared around the bend. And then he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. "Then I'll make another one," he whispered to himself. "Yeah, maybe I will." He walked back home, soaked in cold air but strangely warm inside. He turned on the old lamp, sat back at his desk, and reopened the notebook. This time, he didn't care how long it would take or how many times he'd fall. He just started again. The night moved on quietly. The sound of typing filled the room, mixed with the faint hum of the world outside. Jesse didn't notice the time. He didn't even notice the tears that slipped down his cheeks as he wrote. Because for the first time, his pain wasn't breaking him, it was becoming his ink. He wrote about failure, about doubt, about people who give up right before they're about to win. And somewhere between those lines, he realized he wasn't writing just for himself anymore. He was writing for everyone who ever felt small, unseen, or not enough. By sunrise, he had written more than ever before. His hands hurt, his eyes burned, but his heart, it felt alive. He stood up, stretched, and smiled at the faint orange light creeping through the curtains. Maybe it's not about them believing in me, he said quietly. Maybe it's about me believing in myself first. The room was silent except for the distant chirping of birds. He looked around, took a deep breath, and felt something shift, like the first crack of light breaking through after a storm. He whispered again, as if reminding himself, "It's not over. It's never over." But little did he know, the real storm was still ahead. The storm didn't come from the sky this time. It came from within. Days turned into weeks, and Jesse's quiet fire began to burn brighter, but so did the challenges that tried to put it out. The world doesn't reward silent fighters right away. It tests them first, again and again, to see if their voice can stand the noise. Jesse had found a small online space where he began sharing his writings, thoughts, lessons, little pieces of his heart disguised as stories. At first, nobody noticed. 1 view, 2 views, sometimes none. But he didn't stop. Every night, when the town fell asleep, he stayed up typing with tired eyes and an unbroken will. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing truth. Then came the message. A notification blinked on his cracked phone screen. It was from a stranger, someone he didn't know, someone miles away. "Your words, they saved me tonight." He read it twice. His hands trembled. He didn't know this person, didn't even know what pain they were carrying, but for the first time in his life, he felt what purpose truly meant. It wasn't about success. It was about meaning. It was about connection. It was about giving light to someone else when you barely had any left. That night, he went to the rooftop again. The wind was cold, brushing against his face like a friend he hadn't seen in years. The stars looked scattered, but brighter. "Maybe this is it," he whispered. "Maybe this is what I was meant to do." But life, it never gives you peace without a fight. A week later, his account was hacked. Years of effort, gone in minutes. All his stories, erased. The very words that had saved others, were now lost. He sat frozen, staring at the blank screen, the error messages flashing like small knives. For a long while, he couldn't move. His heart felt like it had been torn open again, only this time, deeper. He walked outside, barefoot, his mind blank. The streets were empty, except for the hum of a passing car and the echo of his own footsteps. "Why?" he whispered, looking up at the sky. "Every time I build something, it gets taken away." His voice cracked, carried away by the wind. He found himself standing near the old bridge, the same one by the river where the boy had floated his paper boat. The memory hit him hard. He walked to the edge, leaning on the cold railing, the water rushing below like an endless heartbeat. "Then I'll make another one," he murmured, recalling the boy's voice. But this time, it wasn't that easy. His mind fought back. What if I fail again? What if no one cares? What if I'm not meant for this? He closed his eyes, trying to silence the storm inside. But then, in that darkness, he heard something, faint, soft, familiar. It was his own voice from years ago, echoing through memory. "They don't know what's coming." He smiled through tears. Maybe it wasn't the world he was fighting anymore. Maybe it was his own doubt. And he was tired of losing to it. Jesse turned back home, drenched in cold air but burning from inside. He powered up the broken laptop again. It whirred weakly, the fan screeching, but the screen flickered to life. Empty folders stared back at him, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He started again. One file. One sentence. One story. He began rewriting from memory. Every word, every emotion, everything he could remember. This time, it was stronger, sharper, deeper. Because pain, when faced twice, no longer breaks you. It shapes you into something unstoppable. He worked through the night. Hours passed, the candle melted down to wax, his fingers aching, eyes red. But he kept going. He wrote until dawn. And when he finally looked outside, the sun was rising, golden light spilling over the rooftops like forgiveness. He whispered, "You can erase my words, but you can't erase me." That day, Jesse changed. He stopped waiting for validation. He stopped chasing applause. He worked quietly, building his presence again, stronger than before. Slowly, people began to find him once more. His stories reached hearts, one by one, just like before, but this time with deeper meaning. He wasn't just writing stories anymore. He was rebuilding souls, including his own. His small channel grew. Not fast, not viral, but steady. Every message, every comment was a reminder that his pain had become someone else's hope. And somewhere in between all the noise of the internet and the silence of his own heart, Jesse realized something profound. Success doesn't arrive with claps or lights. It arrives quietly, in the moment you decide not to give up one more time. He stood before the mirror that night. His reflection looked older, wiser, calmer. "You're doing it," he said softly. "You're finally doing it." And for the first time, his smile didn't feel forced. He walked to his window, looking out at the quiet city below. The wind was soft again, the sky calm, and somewhere distant, he could almost hear the sound of a paper boat gliding over water. Steady, fragile, but free. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "This is not the end, this is the becoming." But deep inside, he knew, one final test still awaited him. Something that would decide if he truly deserved the dream he'd fought for so long. For the night of the storm came again, the same kind that used to terrify him as a child. The sky roared, lightning cut across the darkness, and the wind beat against his windows like an impatient hand. Jesse sat by his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. His latest story was halfway done, but his mind was restless. Something inside him whispered that tonight was different. Then came the call. It was from the same stranger who had once written, "Your words saved me." But the voice on the other end wasn't calm anymore, it was trembling. I just wanted to hear you once before I go," she said softly. His heart froze. "Before you go? What do you mean?" She sobbed quietly. "I can't do this anymore, Jesse. The pain, it's too much. You said in your story that pain has a meaning. But I don't see it anymore." For a moment, Jesse couldn't breathe. The storm outside matched the chaos in his chest. He had written about hope, about light, but now someone was hanging on to those very words for life, and slipping. "Listen to me," he said, standing up. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me? I've been where you are. I've looked into that same darkness. But it's lying to you. It says you're alone. You're not. I'm right here." Her breathing was heavy, broken. "You don't even know me." He took a deep breath. "I don't have to. I know the feeling. And I know what it does. But if you can stay, just one more night, I promise you'll find something worth living for." There was silence. Only the storm spoke. He kept talking, about his failures, about the nights he wanted to quit, about the time everything he'd written vanished and he thought he'd never recover. He spoke from a place no book could teach. "You're part of the reason I started again," he said softly. "So don't you dare disappear from my story now." Finally, he heard her whisper, "Okay, I'll stay." When the call ended, Jesse sat back down, his eyes full. The storm outside began to fade, like it had heard their conversation and decided to rest. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. The man staring back wasn't the same one who used to doubt himself. He had fought the storm within, and now he was guiding others through theirs. Days passed, and a message appeared again, from her. This time it read, "I'm still here. Thank you." Jesse smiled. He didn't reply right away. He simply leaned back, closed his eyes and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted to hear." His stories began to spread beyond borders. Translations, narrations, short films. People started using his words to inspire their own journeys. But Jesse never saw himself as famous. He still lived in the same small room, the same old laptop, the same candle on the desk. What changed was the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. One evening, he returned to the river where the boy's paper boat had once drifted. The air was calm, the water slow and golden under the sunset. In his hand, he held a small notebook, his first one, filled with dreams, sketches, and half-finished thoughts. He smiled, tore out a page, folded it slowly, and placed it on the water. "Go on," he whispered. "Carry my story." The paper boat floated gently, gliding away just like the one from years ago. He watched it until it disappeared into the horizon, a white speck of hope against the setting sun. As he turned to leave, a child's laughter echoed nearby. He looked around. A little boy was standing by the riverbank, watching his paper boat sail. Jesse smiled. History had repeated itself, but this time, it wasn't sorrow. It was a cycle of light. He walked home that evening with no fear, no burden, only calm. The streets were the same, but he wasn't. People still talked about the same things, the same worries, the same routines, but Jesse had learned that meaning isn't found in noise. It's found in stillness, in persistence, in the quiet act of continuing. Back in his room, he wrote his final entry for the night. "I thought success was being seen. But now I know, success is the quiet strength to keep creating, even when no one is watching. The world doesn't owe you recognition. It owes you the chance to become who you're meant to be. And that's enough." He closed his notebook, blew out the candle, and for the first time in years, slept without dreams. Outside, the wind moved softly through the night. Somewhere far away, a paper boat drifted across the dark water, carrying a story that would never sink, because it wasn't just made of paper anymore. It was made of heart.